Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Ozymandias Project. Trireme Transit, the newest and most reliable state-of-the-art time-traveling transportation service, is now boarding for all new and returning passengers. Now departing, present ponderings. Next stop is Ancient Odyssey.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of the podcast. This week, I spoke with Dr. J. Reed, a professor of classics and the director of undergraduate studies at Brown University. He is a scholar of ancient Greek and Roman literature and culture, and has worked especially on Hellenistic and Augustan poetry. He has published a critical study of Vergil's Aeneid, exploring the tentative and evolving sense of a Roman nationality in this national epic. His interests lie mainly in the poetic representation of cultural identity. He has also published papers on the myth and cult of Adonis, especially their syncretistic aspects and social uses. We had an earnest discussion about whether general education requirements are still important, why there aren't more adaptations of Vergil's Aeneid, and about the unique structure of the Brown curriculum. I really learned a lot from this discussion, and I hope that you will too. So take care, and I'll speak to you all next time. Okay, I would like to first off start by thanking you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I was really happy that you had some time, and really excited to have you on the podcast. So I want to just jump right in and ask, how did you find your way into classics? It's such a niche subject that I find everyone has a very unique story, whether it's the most fantastical, amazing story is usually, it differs by person, but
my story isn't fantastical or amazing. I don't think I think it's fairly common. Just when I was a kid, I became interested in ancient Roman history and mythology, as one does. You know, lots of people are interested in that, and just kept taking books out of the library and so on. So I made a plan of taking Latin when I got to high school. It was offered at my high school, and then in college continued with it, and just wasn't finished with it.
Yeah.
I guess I'm still I'm not a historian. So I started reading books I took out of the library as a kid on Roman history especially, but also other classics related things. I'm more of a literary person. So I guess I sort of drifted within ancient Greek and Roman studies a little bit, but I still work on mythology in some ways.
And did you find it an easy jump, or because I know a lot of people like myself, we always just loved stories. We loved mythology. I would read them in books, but then when I got to high school, no one told me that it was an actual discipline that I could go and major in college. So I just didn't think it was going to be possible. I thought it was just going to be kind of a lifelong hobby. So I didn't learn until I got to university. Oh, hey, that is a department. That is a thing.
Well, I don't remember when I became aware. I mean, I guess as I grew up and became aware of what was ahead of me in the next few years and the next school or college I was going to, I gradually became aware of what the possibilities were for continuing learning about this stuff in a more formal way. Obviously, when I was 10 years old, I wasn't thinking about that. And in my elementary school, they were not offering courses dedicated to Roman history or mythology or Latin language or anything. But as I say, I was aware by eighth grade or the end of eighth grade that when I got to high school, I would be able to take Latin. And of course that had been in my sights for a while, just like as kind of the logical next step. And I was also interested in languages to start with. I just have always liked studying languages. So I definitely knew that I wanted to sign up for Latin in ninth grade and just kind of took it from there. At some point in high school, I guess I became aware that there were majors in college and one could major in ancient Greek and Roman studies. And so I made that plan. And then at some point I became aware that you could do this in graduate school as well, or somehow people got higher training in this. So that was kind of on my horizon at some point, maybe even in high school.
Yeah. And how did you make the decision? if you, because so many people I know love languages as well. And they often tell me, oh, okay, well, I liked one of the ancient languages, but I didn't want to just stop there. So I picked up another and then maybe another along the way. So how did you make the decision to do classics rather than linguistics, which is something I like to ask a lot of language nerds like myself?
Linguistics, as a discipline, as a major, let's say, as a formal course of study, didn't appeal to me. And I didn't take very much of that in college. I did take one historical linguistics course in Indo-European linguistics. It was kind of an introductory survey, although it was fairly heavy duty. I guess because I was the courses that I was taking were more on the literature or other manifestations of the culture, some history, some philosophy, and so on. They were taught obviously in English translation, but no, I wasn't interested in linguistics per se.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because that seems to be a really popular thing, which is no, because linguistics gets into the nitty gritty of more than I really am willing to get into. I just kind of want to stick with, I have a background in Latin and I like Latin, or somebody would say the same about Greek and say, well, I'm going to stick with these and I'm okay.
But for me, it probably wasn't a question of eschewing linguistics as a course of study, but rather just filling up my schedule with courses on Latin and Greek authors, Plutarch. What else did I take? Homer, Vergil, Lucan, et cetera, or other things.
And so is your interest in poetry kind of an offshoot of just that love of languages, or like how did you choose your specialization?
I don't know. The muse just pushed me in that direction, I guess. I mean, again, my love of languages is connected to the stuff that I wanted to read in the languages as much as it's just a love of languages per se.
Yeah, and sometimes I find more times than not that's the general answer, which is I don't know how I got into where I got into. I just always had an interest. So yeah, I've learned after asking enough scholars that it's just an incredibly difficult question, one that no one really likes being asked because it's just some sort of innate love that you just kind of delve into and then choose and go with that. It was, oh, I wish I remember who it was, but somebody just said asking a scholar, why did you choose your area of interest, or why did you want to go into what you want to go into? It's akin to asking, do you like breathing? Yes, of course I like breathing. I just do. I breathe. I didn't choose to breathe. I just do it. It's so natural. So so I suppose it's one of those kind of unanswerable ones.
Well, it's something I'm not done with yet. Let's put it that way. And
yeah, we're continually learning.
Satisfies my interests.
Yeah, we're continually learning. It's one of those great professions where you never get to really stop being a student. I mean, of course, when you're a professor and when you start teaching, you are teaching other people, but it is that wonderful place where you can just sort of, you can teach and you can do other things and you can write, but you get to spend your life reading and accruing more knowledge, because it always seems like there's not enough time to study. And I often find that when reflecting on being in college and being in classics, I always think, well, there was that one class that was offered. Why didn't I take that? I wish I had more time.
You only have a certain number of hours in the day and slots on your schedule. When I was in college, it was either 4 or 5 classes, and some like I'm teaching at Brown, and it's like they take 3 or 4. So, you can't do everything.
Yeah, which is so unfortunate. Which is why sometimes I'm like, I should just go to grad school so I can take all the classes that I never got to take. But obviously, it's not quite that easy. But I suppose it's quite different now than even 10 years ago. But I find that as ancient disciplines go, we like to put up artificial barriers to entry, and we make it unnecessarily hard to discover or get into or find reasons to convince people to go into any of the ancient disciplines. Is that something you're seeing currently as a professor? Do you see people kind of say, oh, I didn't know about this, so now it's too late, or how is this going to benefit me? Because now it's just kind of moot. I'm not going to, this isn't going to help me in any way, shape, or form.
If I encountered that those hesitations, I would assure the student that it's not too late, because the undergraduate program at Brown, as in many places, is set up so that if you discover that you're interested in the concentration a couple of years in, even, there are ways for you to pursue it. The requirements are not so burdensome that you can't squeeze it in, usually. Even if they have just discovered Latin or Greek, and they want to take Latin or Greek, they can take an intensive course that's just one semester. Obviously, they're going to have to make a time commitment to do an intensive course and squeeze a whole year into one semester. And then they're going to have to kind of figure things out so that they get enough advanced courses to fulfill the requirements. But there are and there are also a number of different tracks in our classics department. Our concentration has a Latin track and an ancient Greek track, and an ancient Greek and Latin track for those who have a commitment to, can make a time commitment to both. On the other hand, and I was just like an hour ago talking to a student who's a sophomore declaring his major. He wants to do the Greek and Latin track, and he was laying out a kind of a roadmap that I think will work. I told him that if this turns out to be that he bit off more than he can chew, he can kind of scale it back to just ancient Greek or just Latin. What that would mean is fewer language courses. He would, though, have to add some courses in translation or some other courses in the classics department, or archaeology, or some related field. We also offer Sanskrit and modern Greek in the department. So there are different tracks that you can do that might fit somebody's schedule who is coming to it late. So if those are the things that a student is hesitating about, I would reassure them that in most cases, no, they can still do it. You have to kind of squeeze things in maybe, but I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah. So when I wasn't a rising sophomore. I think I was already well into my sophomore year.
What year are you now?
So I graduated in 2018.
Okay. So you're already 2 years.
So I'm unfortunately out of.
What are you doing now? You're running a podcast, but are you doing other things in classics?
No. So after the pandemic, I moved back to Chicago to be near my parents and to save a little, which ended up being a really great decision. So I'm trying to save up to go back to grad school, hopefully next year, in Greece. But I did not meet the language requirements to get into a grad program in classics, just a quirk of the schedule.
Oh, okay. This is what you were about to say.
So basically, I ended up without the languages, but I ended up studying abroad like 3 or 4 times to Greece and the UK and some other places. So I suppose you could say I wanted to travel more and experience the world than learn the languages and put the time in. So I don't regret that decision, but sometimes I definitely think I'd like to go back. And I don't know if it necessarily would be in classics at this point, but I always knew that I wanted to use my background and show people that it's 100% applicable to get a background in something like the ancient studies and then be able to apply it to a different career path, which is to say, I don't want to discourage people from majoring in these things to then have them say, okay, well, now I'm going to be poor for the rest of my life. I'm not going to have money because I wasted my time. And so I decided I'm going to combine my knowledge and background in ancient Greece and do more contemporary stuff. So hopefully I'm hoping to study modern Greek politics and history, economics, it's kind of it's wrapped into a program. It's kind of hard to explain. But
have you read my colleague Johanna Hennig's book?
I have not. It is on my reading list though, because
Yeah.
I have a whole reading list of things that I'm like I need to get through while I'm locked up during the pandemic.
Highly readable.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I'm always looking for reading suggestions. I at this point I should probably stop taking suggestions, only because the list is now going on like 50 books that I'm never going to read through in the amount of time that I have with work and other things.
With any luck, the pandemic will end before you read. We'll gradually get over it. But then again, you can. I mean, I was reading books before there was a pandemic, so.
And it's so funny. It's so weird though, because I feel like, especially my last years in school, because so much of my time was spent reading to write papers and all that. I stopped really reading for pleasure a lot, just because so much of my reading was for my research, for school, for just, this is going to help me advance in my career eventually. This will get me toward grad school. So everything I read suddenly seems quite academic in nature. So I'm just now during the pandemic learning how to sort of read for pleasure again, even if it's still on an important topic that's kind of related to the field or somehow related to research. But I'm learning how to do that again. It's been a very interesting experience to sort of have to relearn. Wait, I can do this for fun. It's not just to absorb the information. But it's I suppose that's a really long and roundabout explanation for when I was about to graduate and then somebody had asked me about grad school. I just said, no, I can't, because it's I don't have the requirements. It's way too exclusive almost. I mean, I don't like using that word, but that's kind of what it was. I mean, and that sentiment rolled back to when I was a sophomore. I was actually considering transferring to Brown from the University of Missouri, where I did my undergrad, because I said, I don't know if Mizzou has what I'm looking for. It kind of is, but I'm not sure if all the things I want to study are accessible to me at this institution. So that kind of gets back to that problem of accessibility, which is just, is it going to accommodate for what I need? Do I feel like it's going to give me both what I want, but also keep an eye toward the future? So I saw that Brown had a way to sort of create your own path, create your own major. And I said, oh, that program sounds like it would be good for me, because I can pile on all the ancient stuff and then maybe mix in some stuff that will help me get a job. Things happened and I didn't end up transferring. So that was just sort of that I left that idea behind. But as someone who works at Brown, though, do you see students coming into the program or transferring to the program and taking advantage of this way to say, okay, well, I'm going to make myself a very accessible program where I can mix in my love of all these ancient things, but also maybe keep an eye and study some more contemporary things that would help them become something that they deem worthy of making money right away after school?
Well, we have. First of all, I wouldn't say, I don't think there's a whole lot of concern among our students about making money once no more than usual. Everybody's concerned about making money once they graduate. But I don't think that a classics concentrator here feels like that it's that great a concern. I mean, people graduate from Brown and they do pretty much whatever they want, because they've already been preparing themselves for a job in that, whatever it is. I hate to generalize, but this is something you have to generalize about, because everybody follows their own path. One other thing, one related thing is that many of our concentrators are concentrating in other things too. One other concentration, or sometimes even two, if they're very ambitious and they put a lot of time into it. Maybe most of them, I should, well, I'm not going to go into my little folder and count them now to see if we have more one concentration people, but I think a majority of them are concentrating in something else at the same time. And some of that is, some of them are dual concentrating in another thing that they do intend to get a job in. So for example, a lot of students are pre-med. So they're also concentrating in biology or neuroscience or something like that, some kind of a health field. Some of them are doing another more literary kind of thing, comp lit, for example. I know some are doing music. So, they might be planning a job in this other thing that they're concentrating in, rather than going on and doing a job in classics, becoming a Latin teacher, or going on to grad school in Latin. And some of them do. A few of them do go on and become high school Latin teachers. I'm writing a recommendation for a student right now who is applying to MAT programs, Masters in Teaching programs. And there's a student who did that last year. I think there's probably always one or two students who do that. And then some who go on to grad school in classics. Most don't. They might go into some completely different field, or they might go into a field that's related to the other thing they're concentrating in. So it's just very common for students in our program to do a dual concentration, or even as I say, even 3, although that's kind of rare. I wouldn't recommend it, but there are some who do it. If they come in with enough preparation, sure.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I wish more places kind of allowed for that, because I feel like definitely, at least where Mizzou's concerned, they didn't. It was kind of like, if you were going to get the classics major, then you would be expected to, other than the gen eds, you would just take all the elective courses.
Brown prides itself on and brands itself with the open curriculum, right? This is something that's been the case for 50 plus years. Brown formulated this open curriculum. And what it means is that there are very, very few requirements and no area requirements outside of the concentration. So I was an undergrad at Yale, and we had four, what did they call them? We had distributional requirements in 4 different fields, right? So it was arts and literature, language and literature, and arts and history and social sciences and math and science, right? So we had to take 2 courses in each of those 4 fields by the time we finished sophomore year, and then 1 in each field. Obviously, at least 1. You could take more, and you had to, depending on your major, but then 1 more in your next 2 years. Brown does not have those things. And for some reason, I noticed Brown explains this as a way for people to just spread out and explore and do lots of different things. But obviously, in practice, what it more distinctively permits is for students to focus on just the thing they're concentrating on. They don't have to be distracted and take a course on art history if they're, for example, if they're majoring in physics, okay, or something like that, right? Or vice versa. You don't have to take a course in physics if you're majoring in art history, et cetera, et cetera. So it is somewhat easier at Brown to pile on different concentrations, to focus on 2 different things, focus on the requirements for those 2 fields. Let's say classics and biology. Let's say the Latin track of classics and something in biology, because you don't have to go and take all these other required courses. You do have to make sure that you've got a certain number of writing requirements, of writing intensive courses along the line. There are a few requirements of that type, but and there's a diversity requirement. They have to take a course that satisfies that somewhere along the line. But those aren't tied to a specific subject or field, right? Those are things you can satisfy by taking courses in just pretty much any field or any program in the college.
Do you think that other universities would benefit from adopting the Brown model? Because I definitely think that my academic experience and that of a lot of my friends would have gone very differently had that been the case. Because I know personally, I'm just trash at math and science. I mean, I have a learning disability in math, so I'm never going to do better than like a C minus or a D in math, which is going to kill my GPA. So then having that sort of on my record is really going to hinder me if I'm trying to apply to grad schools, because they look at the overall GPA and they're like, well, why is it so low? And I say, well, if you look at just the classes in classics, I'm sitting here with like a 3.8 GPA alone. But then when you add in all the gen eds that I had to do and the financial planning courses that I was forced to take that I just absolutely couldn't stand, the whole GPA picture is just kind of sad and not where I would want it to be. So,
well, it sounds like you would have benefited from an open curriculum of the Brown type or something similar. Looking back at my own experience in college, I'm also not so much a math and science person. I didn't resent having to take math and science courses or history courses or social sciences, which were the other distributional groups. But on the one hand, well, I mean, I remember beginning of freshman year, I took an astronomy class and I got a C. So that brought my GPA down. I don't remember what I don't think we paid attention to GPAs, but it brought my average down. And I didn't get a C after that, fortunately. That was like sort of adjusting to college maybe, but it was also the fact that there's a lot of information, a lot of physics, and I hadn't been great at that even in high school. On the other hand, there were courses that I used to fulfill those distributional requirements that were closer to other things that I was studying. So for example, I fulfilled one of the math and science requirements with a course in ancient astronomy. And that was really, it didn't skimp on the math. We did a lot of sexagesimal addition and subtraction and division and stuff, because we were reading these cuneiform tablets. And the assignments were, go home here, get some graph paper and try to figure out where Mulbabar, the ancient Mesopotamian, I guess is an Akkadian name for Jupiter, was predicted to be at a certain point or something. This is going back like 30 or 40 years, so I don't remember what exactly the assignment was. But it was, even though there was a lot of math and science in it, it was pretty straightforward. And it was connected to something that I could then connect to stuff I was doing elsewhere. At the same time, what was I taking that semester? I was taking I was taking a Plutarch course. So no, there's not a lot of meshing going on between Babylonian, and we did, like towards the end of the semester, there was some conics, Euclidean conics and stuff. I don't remember this very clearly at all, but it didn't mesh that well with Plutarch's Life of Alcibiades. And yet it's all the ancient world, that ancient Mediterranean and West Asian network of cultures. So it wasn't quite as stark a difference. It was a historical study in some ways. It wasn't as stark a difference from what I was doing in classics as was an astronomy course, which was really just about how the stars worked and what we knew about stars and galaxies and stuff like that. This is more like, what were the ancient Mesopotamians saying about stars and galaxies, or at least these particular stars, and how were they studying these things? And what is it? This is a very cultural thing. They're using a sexagesimal system, not our decimal system, right? Everything is going by 60s. Well, this sort of, you had to think cross-culturally, which is something that I was doing anyway.
And I think that sounds great. I mean, I would have appreciated that at least. I usually try to stay away because I don't think of myself as like a resentful person of having to take things that quote unquote colleges say will make me a well-rounded person. I don't resent that at all, but I think it's just an overall frustration with the way that our academic system for most standard universities, colleges kind of set it up, which is, I'm sorry, you're going to have to take XYZ classes that probably don't have anything to do with what you want to major in. You're just going to have to take it. And there's no attempt to really connect it to the stuff that I really like. I had to take a atmospheric sciences course, like on meteorology.
Atmospheric.
And I just remember thinking, I'm not about to be a weather lady. I don't.
But you're going to experience the weather. You can connect this with your everyday experience. You want to know whether to bring an umbrella if you go outside and why, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had to make concessions to myself, like, okay, well, this may not connect to the ancient stuff, but it connects to my normal life. So, if I want to look at the weather in the morning on the news and then sort of try to predict things, or just go outside and look at the clouds and say, I think it's going to rain today. So I made these like concessions and promises with myself. But at the end of the day, I really wish that I could have taken classes that related better to the ancient stuff, but it didn't work out that way. So I was forced to sort of take classes that I just did not enjoy in any way, shape, or form. But I got through it, and it was what it was. But yeah, I really have been an admirer of the Brown model. I had a really good friend that I met during my college years who transferred to Brown as a sophomore, and she said she loved it, and it was a great experience because she was able to focus really on exactly what interested her. And it strikes me, it seems like it's kind of like the European model, where in Europe, if you like a subject and you're good at that subject, they actively encourage their students, okay, follow that, do that. Don't waste your time with gen ed requirements. If you hate physics and you're never going to take it because you want to be an art historian, don't bother taking the class. And they don't. So
I think in Europe, it has traditionally been uncommon for students to take courses at the college level, the university level, the post-secondary level, outside a fairly narrow course of studies. I think traditionally they've been channeled right out of high school into something.
Yeah, and I think that has to do just with the way that they also structure their high school. It always shocks me when I talk to some European friends of mine, and they're like, "Oh, going to university, much less grad school, is not a given. You're just like, yes, they value their education, but I don't know. It strikes me as it's a whole different system, a whole different way of setting things up, especially the way they describe their sort of high school years, which is they use those years to really like pinpoint where your exact skills are. Like, so by the time you go to university, it's not so much pick any major, just experiment around. When I explained to my friends that in the American school system, we have a lot of, you can be an undeclared major until junior year because you can take the time to find what you like. And they're always shocked because they're like, what's this undeclared stuff? No, you go in and you declare as something the moment you get in.
Well, you say, I mean, you enter university knowing what you're going to study, knowing your course of study, that the equivalent to a major. A student in England will go to university to read whatever, and that's the equivalent of their major or concentration.
Yeah, and so I want to take a moment to just bring the conversation back a little bit, because I know that you've worked on, I think pretty extensively, Vergil's Aeneid. Am I correct?
Yes.
So
and taught it very often. Well, not very often, but a bunch of times.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, what is it particularly about the Aeneid that you love to research and love to teach? Because I read it a couple times for a couple different classes during undergrad, and I got something quite different each time it was taught, just in the context of the class. But I would.
Were you studying different parts of the poem? Did you go over the same books, or was it different books of the poem each time?
I would say 2 classes we read the whole thing, because one was a Greek and Roman epic course.
The whole thing in translation.
Yes, and then another class, it was just sort of certain books, certain segments, because there was like a what was it called? It was a course on like the archetype of ancient heroes. It was like a hero's journey class, where we kind of looked at certain aspects of like Aeneas's most heroic moments. And then there was one, it was a Age of Augustus course, I think, where we looked sort of at, and then we analyzed a whole different section of that, talking about, where do we see this new proto-Roman hero being established versus where do we still see elements of that ancient Greek tradition hero. Yeah, there were a few different courses where we definitely picked out different things.
Right. So each time there's a different context for your reading, and the teacher and your fellow students are bringing out different connections in the poem. Well, I mean, I should just say that it's a epic poem. It's a 12-book poem that fills up what, like, I just happened to, here's the Aeneid in Fred All's translation, which I was using last semester. Okay, there are a lot of different translations. I don't know if you use this one, but it's a big poem, right? Here's my desk. Oh, this is the one I use in college. You can see that it's a little the worse for wear, right? But I've got it in my desk. This isn't just the Aeneid, though. This is the OCT Vergil. It's a hefty poem with a lot going on, right? And it's written in the Augustan period by a poet, Vergil, who is very sensitive to the Greek and Roman culture that has come before him and other cultures that have come before the Augustan period, and very sensitive to how all of those can serve as models or not for his image of his own time, which is being reflected quite explicitly by prophecies and flashes forward and so on throughout the poem, and also implicitly just because his story in the story that he's telling in some indirect way models contemporary Romanness, the contemporary Roman establishment as it's gelling, as it's in the process of gelling, because it's Augustus is setting up a new Roman government. So there's just a lot going on there, a lot flowing into the poem, a lot of influences, a lot of different receptions of those influences. So there's always something new to look at. It can satisfy a lot of different, I can look at it as just like language, Latin. Oh, what's he doing? This interesting use of this word, lots of poetic tropes going on, different metaphors and so on. How do they fit together? Is there some overall metaphoric here? There's some system of metaphors that is pushing us to see things in a certain way. You can look at it in terms of characters. What are these characters doing? Representations of people. How do they compare and contrast to each other? How does Vergil set the characters up against each other? You can look at it for like just historical and cultural data, obviously very carefully. Again, you can't just mine it for snapshots of something, but representations of the culture filtered through something, a certain lens on what the Romans had available to them. Politically, it represents certain things in a very complex way.
Yeah, I remember there was a certain class, and I'm so sad I don't remember which one it was, but we were looking at with a particular focus on sort of defining the differences between like the old Greek heroes of Homeric tradition, and then the new way that Augustus wanted the ideal Roman hero to differ. And so we saw sort of the change in how Aeneas goes from being very sort of standard Greek hero to how he evolves and changes during his Odyssey. And I always found that journey so interesting.
Well, how do we know what Augustus wanted in a hero? We can be pretty sure what Vergil wanted in a hero, unless he went very much astray, because we've got 12 books of several heroes, lots of different characters, especially Aeneas. But the relationship to what Augustus wanted is pretty indirect. maybe we can assume, and maybe some people do assume, that whatever came out of the poem is what Augustus wanted, because Vergil died and he had the poem copied and published. But then again, he wasn't dictating the poem.
Right. I think the professor I had at the time very much just sort of implied that because Vergil and Augustus were very friendly, I think is the way she put it. She just said,
they were friendly.
Yeah, she. It was so funny. She was
friendly.
It was just it stuck out to me because it was so funny, because she was like, oh, they were friendly, and Vergil wanted to please his buddy Augustus, so he wrote what he thought. He wrote what he thought would please him.
That sounds like you're taking a risk with that hypothesis. What we don't have very many biographical facts on Vergil. One thing we do know is that he lived in Naples most of the time. I don't think maybe Augustus came down and visited every weekend. I don't think so.
I'm not doing it justice because I don't remember much about the class, because I think I took this either sophomore or junior year now, which is now about 4 or 5 years ago. But I just remember that was kind of the hypothesis that my professor was working off of.
Vergil has adulatory things to say about Augustus, particularly in the Georgics. When he makes some kind of encomiastic laudatory statements about Augustus in the Eclogues or the Aeneid, of course, it's in the mouth of a character, right? Even in Eclogue 4, which is in the first person, it's a monologue. This is clearly not Vergil himself in his own persona. This is some sort of rustic persona that he's taking on, and sometimes there's a named character who's speaking. And in the Aeneid, of course, this is a third person poem, and when Augustus comes up, often in very heavily encomiastic terms, like, he's going to bring back the golden age, it's a character speaking. It's Anchises, or it's or not a character speaking. Maybe in book 8 on the shield of Aeneas, there's a picture of Augustus triumphing over Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, and then at his actual ceremonial triumph, receiving the conquered nations and so on. This is a representation of a work of art, so it's always mediated by something.
Oh yeah, I mean that would make a lot of sense. And what would you say to someone, because there are a lot of people that I talk to who say, what's so great about the Aeneid? It's essentially the Iliad and Odyssey crammed into one book, a lot shorter, but it's essentially the same thing. So why should I read that? What would you say to someone?
I would say to that person, you've obviously never read the Aeneid, because it has a lot of elements in common with the Iliad and the Odyssey, and even those elements are even brought out by close imitations, close parallels, and repetitions of events, action and wording and so on. But that's not the whole poem. There's a lot more going on in the poem. There's Rome, for one thing. Thematically, maybe if you reduced it just to travels and battle scenes or something, then it seems like that. But there's more in the poem than travels and battle scenes. It's a foundational epic, which the Iliad and the Odyssey are only, only very indirectly. This is a foundational imperial epic, and it has to do with Rome's place among nations in a way that maybe the Iliad gets to in hindsight, because it's Greeks versus Trojans, and later periods can sort of calc the Trojans onto Asians in general, Anatolians, West Asian peoples, barbaroi in the Greek sense, non-Greeks, but sort of localized to West Asia. It's harder to do that with the Odyssey, whose non-Greek others are sort of more fanciful people. It's not as easy to calc onto actual human beings. But I mean, the Aeneid is doing this in a very, a very overt way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a political poem.
Oh, yes, 100% it is. And I will admit that through my college years, I was definitely a very strong Hellenist, very strong. I didn't really, I think I ended up taking like 1 or 2 classes on Rome just because it wasn't what I was particularly interested on. But I remember thinking before, it was right after the first time that I read the Aeneid, my first reaction was, what? No, this is the Iliad and the Odyssey in reverse order, but trying to show the difference and creating the first proto-Roman hero. And then
that's what Servius says somewhere, right? Wait a minute. Actually, because of the pandemic, I brought so many books from my office. I have everything right here. What is Servius? What is the exact word? But Servius's commentary, so this is circa 400, right? This is a Roman scholar who's writing about the Aeneid. Yeah, who says that basically the first half of the poem is modeled after the Odyssey and the second half after the Iliad. So he's seeing that. He's doing a certain amount of literary history, what we might call intertextual studies, or at least finding those models. But those are just very broad-based models, right? You can dig in there, as I say, and find specific imitations of actions and characters and words and everything, but they're recontextualized, so they're always doing something else and something new. The whole, it's often been noted that the whole ancient poetics of imitation in Greece and Rome anyway has to do with imitation as the engine of originality. So we, in our culture, especially the past 200 years, is like, imitation? No, that's not. You should be original. You should do your own thing. This is not an issue that comes up so much in ancient Rome or ancient Greece. It's more like you imitate people and do your own thing. They're two sides of the same coin. In Greek, mimesis and zdelosis, right, which is kind of means imitating and competing with, right? In Latin, imitatio emulatio, imitation and competition, or vying with, or outdoing, or something like that. Outdoing could come into it, like you're doing something better, but you're at least doing something different. There is that interplay. They're always conscious of that interplay of repetition and substitution.
Yeah, I learned when I learned more in other courses, and I reread the poem, and especially when focusing on certain passages, I did realize it is more than just what we stereotype it to be, which is just some crude imitation. It was a friend of mine who said it's the world's very first massive large scale plagiarism, and I said, well, that's not entirely true. I mean, it takes a lot of very similar strategies to how it's crafted, especially with Aeneas's voyage to the underworld, and he has to talk to 3 ghosts, and it's the same thing that Odysseus had to do. And so I say, yeah, on the surface, okay, 3 and 3, and the same kind of thing had to happen, but yeah, but it's very much its own work. I later came to realize, and it's shorter. It's too. It takes 2 large books. Epics and it crams them into one of 12 books.
It's only 12 books, but it's those books are longer than the ones in Homer. You know the opposite of doing that. Do you know Nonnus's epic, the Dionysiaca, from around 400, 450? This is a 48 book epic on the adventures of Dionysus, especially his battles against India. And lots of mythological characters in there too. But that's 48 books. However, those tend to be shorter than the ones in Homer. So yeah, there are more. It takes up 3 load volumes, but you don't have to read quite as much as you would expect.
And so because the Aeneid, upon further inspection, is brilliantly its own thing, which is quite distinct from Homer's works. Why do you think we don't see more people sort of in popular culture trying to adapt the Aeneid? I mean, we have the Brad Pitt Troy and the new Netflix miniseries about that's sort of loosely based on the Iliad. Why do you think we don't attempt the Aeneid more? Is it because people just say, oh, it's too similar?
This is something that people have discussed a lot. I mean, part of it is that it's got less universal content, not in all ways, but as a whole, it's really focused on ancient Rome, which you think, that in itself is not so much a problem. There are plenty of movies and TV shows that take place in ancient Rome, and they make a lot of money because people think Rome, emperors, gladiators, awful things going on, luxury and everything. There's a certain stereotype about Rome that people like to put into movies, but those qualities are not the qualities that the Aeneid is attaching to Rome so much. It's a more complicated thing. It's more about constructing a Roman identity, a Roman position, or let's say a position within the world, a subject position that within the world and within history that can be identified in one way or another with the Roman, right? And it doesn't get so much into that. There are no gladiators, right? There are no emperors, really. There aren't these things that you would find in the movie Gladiator or Spartacus or whatever people are looking for. Now, it's true that you could make a movie out of this, and you could have a big romance with Dido, and you could have big battle scenes of the kind that everybody likes to see. I'm a little over this. Peter Jackson. If you get Peter Jackson to direct this, and everybody would go see everybody getting their head chopped in two and their guts spilling all over the place. But I don't know, for one reason or another, people haven't. I want to say maybe it's because of this. This is something that, again, people keep bringing up. Aeneas is not this compelling character. He's not this heroic character the way an Achilles is, or especially an Odysseus is really a focus for us. People can identify. I don't know. Is that true? Does everybody identify with Odysseus? I think people tend to, more than with Aeneas. In fact, I always find, and this is just my experience, reading the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Aeneid and the Odyssey both have those several book long passages where the main character is narrating his experiences, right? Odysseus has such a strong voice and perspective that he creates that you tend to remember the rest of the poem as if he were telling that story, which he's not. He's only in those few books. The Aeneid, Aeneas has such a diluted voice, I'll put it that way, such a less distinctive voice and perspective that he creates, that you tend to remember books 2 and 3 as if they were narrated in the third person, or at least that's how a lot of people treat them. They just go back and say, oh, and this is what happened. Troy fell and they went from here to here, without framing it as Aeneas says this is what happened when Troy fell. Aeneas says that this is why they went from here to here, and so on. He's got this much more diluted viewpoint. However, I'm not sure that I want to go ahead and say that that's why the poem does not attract, what do you want to say, recreations in other media, in modern media, film versions, TV versions, graphic novels, novelizations, the way that some other epics do. Because look at the Argonautica, right? Everybody says the same thing about Jason and the Argonauts. Maybe they're not going back to Apollonius's Argonauts. Jason is such a diluted figure in there too. He doesn't really provide that kind of focus that an Odysseus or an Achilles or a Hector does, or even an Ajax or a Dolon. But nevertheless, people can get over that. You can make a TV miniseries. You can make a movie. The Ray Harryhausen special effects version of Jason and the Argonauts that you can find that on YouTube, right? It's up there. For some reason, you can get past it. You can recreate that myth. The myth of Aeneid. I think maybe it's just that it's not one of these standard heroic myths. He's not a Hercules. He's not a Jason. He's like the Roman founding hero, and he doesn't have any particular adventures that are distinct from those guys' adventures. There's something else going on in the poem.
I'm wondering though. Yes, he doesn't immediately cut a figure like Achilles, but that's not to say people wouldn't be. I mean, and sometimes I wonder, is it maybe because no one wants to quote unquote start a story with sort of a loser of such an epic war, because he does flee Troy, but the American public has been enamored with people sort of in this idea of a dying civilization. I mean, why do we like Gone with the Wind? I mean, the South falls. Scarlett O'Hara does not. She loses everything in the first half of the entire movie. So,
Aeneas could be the Scarlett O'Hara of I don't know. Does that make Dido the Rhett Butler? Does it make Lavinia the Rhett Butler, or maybe it makes Turnus the Rhett Butler? I don't know. But I don't think the problem is he starts out as a loser, like he's a refugee. He isn't able initially to find a place to live, and that's what the poem is about, this settlement. Because he ends up winning this battle, and that's where the poem ends, and he is going to settle there, and Rome is going to rise, and you've got all kinds of foreshadowings of that throughout. So a filmmaker could do something with it.
Right. I mean, he could start out as a Scarlett O'Hara, but that doesn't mean that he has to stay that way. I mean, the poem itself essentially turns him into your more Achilles-like hero at the end. I mean, the duel and the beating Turnus, being able to establish Rome. I would think it would be quite exciting to be able to take someone from a losing situation. Yes, you're a refugee, you have to bounce around for a little while, but I mean, I think that there's such rich source material to have, whether it's a movie or some kind of mini TV series where you have the Dido romance. I feel like that would attract a lot of people. I don't know, people like timeless romances, sort of, even if they are doomed to end tragically. But I mean,
insofar as the Aeneid has attracted what do you call it, remediatizations? What do you call it when you recreate the story of a work in a different medium, or maybe in the same medium? I don't know.
I mean,
Nobody's going to write another hexameter epic on this, but
I think I would just call it as an adaptation, I would imagine. Okay,
an adaptation. It has received that in opera, right? Purcell, and then there's some others, and probably some plays, right?
I think so. There might have been one.
The English tradition, what's his name? Marlowe's Dido. There was I remember when I taught at Cornell, a student of mine who now is a professor of classics at Duke, Lauren Donovan Ginsburg. I remember her saying that this singer Dido, there was a singer. She was a pop singer, right? This was like 20 years ago. Her name was Dido. And I remember Lauren, or now Professor Ginsburg, saying, and if you listen to that album and you go through it, it's like she's doing like an album version, a pop music album version of you can map those themes onto the story of Dido and Aeneas. Now, I don't know if this singer deliberately did that, but according to Lauren, you could do it. I don't know if she's done anything with that. You could have her on the podcast and follow up.
Yeah, and ask her. I know there are several famous paintings that have been done about Aeneas and Dido, but that's obviously not quite the same thing as a.
No, I mean, you can find anything in painting. The history of European painting since the 14th century, particularly, but maybe especially since the Baroque period. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I would love to just see whether it's some sort of film adaptation, but even just in more popular culture, I mean, we have like the little Playmobil gods and goddesses and heroes sets. I'm like, I'd love to see a little Dido and a little Aeneas and Playmobil, so that way you know their story, and it's you can just have them sort of
Ernest,
sitting on your bookshelf. Yeah, you can have a Turnus on
the
your
faithful
bookshelf.
Achates, the faithful Achates. Who else could you put up there? Evander, little
Uh,
Evander
yeah, little
figure.
Vander.
I like them all.
Right. I mean, you could have just your Aeneid set, right? You could have a little Carthage, build a
Sure.
little Carthage.
Mezentius. I want the Mezentius.
Oh, I know several people who would want that as well.
Caicus. Your little Caicus and your little Hercules, and make them fight each other. Get a
Well, honestly, if you
Caicus.
have a little Aeneas, you could pair it with your little Playmobil figures of Achilles and Menelaus and some of the Trojan heroes, right? And then you could have them
Right,
kind of set up.
right. Make your own epic. You know, you could do. You should get the Diomedes figure and the Aeneas figure rematch.
Yes,
Get them back together. This is like your fan fiction. You know that the son of Mark Antony, Iulus Antonius, wrote a 12-book epic on Diomedes. We don't have the thing. We don't even have fragments, but we have a notice that he did. And I think there's some indications in the mythological literature of how he might have, he might have been the source for some of the material we're getting from that period on Diomedes. But it would have been interesting to see how he, in response to Vergil and in response to Augustus, how this son of Mark Antony might have sketched out the adventures of this antagonist of Aeneas.
Oh, there's so many great things that I would love to see that people have time to create and do. I would have loved, obviously, for more historical evidence that we could really have a window into what these ancient people were thinking. And so, okay, we've now established that the Aeneid needs to be taken and people need to do more with it, because that would be really fun for a lot of Latinists out there, but also just for classicists in general. But turning a little to your other sort of area of expertise, I saw that you have done some work with the cult of Adonis, which sounds really, really fun.
And myth. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting phenomenon because, well, first of all, dying gods or lamented gods, these figure divine or semi-divine figures, or simply, they're connected to the divine by being the lover of a goddess or something, right? There's just a lot of different ones that are similar, and they cross cultures, and there's a lot of different evidence, and it's often very syncretistic and cross-cultural. So it's just interesting dealing with that. And when I first started working on it, I realized that there was a tendency in the scholarship to try to flatten all the evidence on Adonis into a single cult or a single myth, that all the evidence was like reflecting in different ways. And I don't think so. I think these are different. They're more different than that. They go under his name, and there are some common features, but we should respect the different cultures and periods that they're coming out of.
Well, and unlike Aeneas, Adonis shows up quite often in our popular culture. It's a modern saying. Oh, he's such an Adonis. He pops up now.
Paradigm for someone so good looking that the goddess of love even would be in a relationship with him. Well, I don't know. Yeah, but that's how we use Adonis. We don't use Adonis as like poor guy who got killed in a war, except for Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, right? Shakespeare wrote.
And so how do you feel though with that part of sort of your research, where you see him popped up in our culture, in our expressions? People have not been afraid to sort of mention or portray him in film and TV. So is it really?
Is he portrayed in film and TV?
He is. I can't name all of them. The one that unfortunately pops up in my head right away is Disney animated Hercules. It's really fast. He's only in there for like all of 2 seconds.
Ago, actually. Yeah, he must be like a bit player. or something. Yeah.
It's
I mean,
short. It's like 3
the thing
seconds
about
long.
Adonis is interesting. One of the things that's interesting is that he is not a subject. He's not a narrator. He is not someone who tells his own story. And that's something that's always interested me in his story as it's told in the different ancient versions. And if we're talking about the modern reception, in certain modern reflections of this, either telling adaptations, as you say, of his myth or similar myths, especially there's Shakespeare and in the 19th century. But in Shakespeare does give him a voice, a very vigorous voice. Shakespeare, this is all about a dialogue. This is all about like a contestation between the two characters. Most of the time, though, he's not. He just recedes. He's an object, and that makes him kind of interesting. He is the object. He's turned away from us. He's turned away from Venus or Aphrodite because he is dead. In the poem that that was a big part of my dissertation in my first book, Bion of Smyrna's poem on Adonis, the epitaph on Adonis, which is about his death. He's either dead or asleep. There's nothing in there about his life or his activity, their life together, or barely. Maybe you can kind of glimpse it if you read between the lines. But I know in ancient literature, of all the little fragmentary pieces of testimony, let alone the big, longer narratives of his myth, I only know of 2 places where it's Adonis who is speaking.
Wow.
So he doesn't tell his story. He doesn't control his narrative. In the narratives that we have, it might be Venus or Aphrodite who is doing that, and some other character.
And would you like to see that change? Would you like to see maybe people be able to take on his story and expand it and give him a voice?
If it works for the narrative. I don't know if I'm particularly interested in hearing what he has to say, but maybe.
Well, I mean,
the 2 that we have, there's one that's doubtful. I probably, you can imagine that this is probably Adonis speaking. It's a tragedy by the tyrant Dionysius of Syracuse. And we have a fragment, and it's from a tragedy that was performed in Athens at the festival. It's titled Adonis, and the fragment is a character saying something like, "I'm going to go out and hunt a boar, and I'm going to bring back the trophies and hang them up on the door," whatever. Okay, so from the myth that later became current, that he did die in a boar hunt. It's not the only myth of his death, but it's one that became widespread. But that's probably Adonis. The other one is by the poet Praxilla, who's in the century before, mid 5th century. And Praxilla, lyric poet, has him say, and this is the way her lines are quoted, this is Adonis speaking. Adonis is dead. He's in the underworld. He's asked, what is it that you most miss about the upper world, right? And I'm going to get the exact quotation now. He says, "The most beautiful thing I leave behind is the light of the sun. Secondly, the bright stars and the face of the moon, and ripe cucumbers and apples and pears." So organic produce is the third thing that he misses most about the upper world. So he is controlling his narrative after the fact. That's kind of interesting. I don't know if there's any more of that. I don't know if even if his story was a major part of that poem, because again, we only have that excerpt that's quoted.
Yeah, and sometimes I just like to ask about, if I happen to be lucky and talk to someone who studies someone who isn't one of the more popular figures, because I do realize there are so many figures, both historical and mythological, that not all of them really need to be made into a whole film. They don't need a TV series. They don't need an action figure, but some of them, it's interesting to hear, do you think that at least, does this person deserve more? Because are they actually more consequential than we realize? Or have they just fallen into becoming a trope of popular culture where that's all that most people will know about them, which is the popular expression? And so then they don't really know anything about the character or the person that came from.
Well, there's not much to know about this character or person. right? I mean, it would all depend on how the handling went, right? It would all depend on what the screenwriter or the actor or the director or whoever it is decided to do with this figure. This Adonis is a figure who is loved and lamented. That those are powerful themes. Do something with them.
Yeah, I admit I don't, for a good reason. I don't know much about Adonis other than I first was aware just because of the popular expression that it was meant to convey that someone was really super good looking and very desirable.
Well, in Greek, the sources like Bion call him Kalos Adonis, right? Beautiful Adonis, Kalos, good looking. And in Latin, sometimes Formosus or synonyms for that.
Yeah, I mean, the way we reduce them to sort of just their epithets, and that's sort of what they are. It's interesting. So kind of going from, okay, so now we've had this great discussion about, where we see these things pop up in our popular culture. We obviously talk about them, whether it's looking at the exact source material or if we interact with them in some way, shape, or form. In terms of, I hate what's going on now, but in this current age where there's not really an emphasis on the importance of the humanities anymore. I feel like people are just getting further and further away from that, which often results in just sort of the defunding of programs. It's not important. It's just some old stuff. Go learn it on your own time. There are obviously a lot of lessons we can take looking at the ancient source material, just learning a lot about the past, and applying it to modern life, modern culture. Do you think that there is a way where we can effectively sort of do what we did here today, which is look at this stuff and say, oh, we talk about this all the time. We can apply this to sort of critically look at our culture, our civilization, how we frame things. Is there an argument to be made? We need to reinvest time, resources, and just make a concerted effort to essentially do more of on a large scale of what we're doing here, which is just talking about how much it affects us.
Yes, you won't get a no from me. If we're talking specifically about ancient Greece or Rome, ancient Greek and Roman culture, then yes, there's a lot of value in studying a long ago civilization that is very different from what we're used to in our society, and yet that has left a lot of evidence and even provided lots of models, and to study those cultures in their connections with other cultures of the time and their connections with our own culture, to study it in a way that both estranges it and finds those assimilations, finds those similarities between us and them. We want to keep them at arm's length, but at the same time recognize the relevance of what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. And I believe you serve as director of undergraduate studies?
I am, yeah.
So when young potential freshmen come to you and just say, hey, I love poetry, I love ancient Rome, I saw that one Disney movie and I loved this certain mythological character, but I don't know what to do with that because I'd like to become an investment banker. What does that conversation look like?
That's the thing. I wouldn't get that at Brown. They know that they can become an investment banker with a classics degree. And that's very, this is kind of a dirty class secret in some ways, that there are certain universities you can go to where everybody knows or learns that whatever you major in, maybe it's different now than it was when I was in college. I don't think so, though. I mean, there are Brown classics graduates in recent years who have gone on to become investment bankers. And they might have done a dual major in econ or something, but they didn't have to. They knew they didn't have to.
And again, that's just so
they
nice.
could go on and do something else, just as they can go on to med school. Of course, if you go on to med school, you have to take a certain number of courses in the sciences, or you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get into med school, but you can do that. And so it just doesn't come up as much. There are places where it does come up, where nobody knows that. When I was teaching at Ohio State, for example, students didn't know that. If you suggested to them majoring in classics, a lot of them, probably most, would say, well, I want to get a job afterwards, and I don't want to be a Latin teacher or a Greek teacher. And they would take some persuading to make them see that that's not necessarily what would happen. But they didn't know people who had done that. They didn't know people who had majored in classics, majored in Greek or Latin or both, and then gone on to Wall Street or med school or law school or business school or some totally different thing. Become an actor, become a writer.
And I think that's it must be so nice, because I have talked to several professors who are director of undergraduate studies or chairs of their department, and they often talk about the struggles they have sort of convincing students and convincing students' parents that this is actually a good thing, that it's worth it, and no need to be miserable throughout your undergrad career trying to do something that you think will immediately pay off in terms of a high-paying job the moment you graduate. So it must be nice to be in a different situation, to be able to have a different sort of conversation, not come please do this, but more of a, okay, you're going to do this, so how can we help you also then combine it with what you think you might want to go in. I'm imagining that conversation is a lot more fun.
Well, the persuading doesn't come up as much.
That would be a great ideal eventual situation where nobody who's a director of undergraduate studies has to persuade people that it's a valid field of study for one. I
mean, we're not like fighting them off or anything. We're welcoming them, and we do have answers to their questions. And
honestly, in a perfect world, though, wouldn't you want people to come? Because, to me, I think that'd be kind of fun, though, to have so many people interested that you do have to kind of say, wait, no, wait. Okay.
We've got room for everybody in the program.
Good.
As I say, it's a bit easier at Brown to concentrate in more than one thing.
Yeah. That's the dream. I sometimes I look back and I wish I would have gone through with the transfer just to see what would have happened. But oh, well. So at the end of every podcast episode, I have each guest read Percy Shelley's Ozymandias. And then afterwards, if you could just give me your thoughts on, what do you make of the poem? Does it speak to you in a special way? What feelings does it evoke?
Okay. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. There's a Monty Python sketch that involved this poem. I don't know if you know that. You can look it up see if it's on YouTube.
I vaguely remember it, I think. Wow.
Ant. Everything, the word ants kept getting interpolated into the dialogue. So it ended up, my name is Ozymandias, King of Ants. I saw this, but I'm sure you could find it online somewhere.
I know that I'm familiar with a lot of films, TV shows, popular culture things, whether or not they interact with the full poem. They do seem to take the name or the word Ozymandias and use it. It's really interesting. I think there were a couple TV shows where they have Ozymandias in the episode name. For some reason, I don't watch enough of it to know, unfortunately. I don't know. is this the kind, as someone who is kind of an expert in poetry, is this the kind of poem that do you think it's like an Aeneid where people might be wanting to read this 2,000 years from now? Is it timeless?
I don't know. You have to wait 2,000 years. It's very much of its time, but that's not to say that it's not something that we can read something into. I mean, if I were to read it in its time, I'd say this is a very high romantic poem, a very early 19th century poem, a very post-French Revolution poem in its reception of antiquity, of its reception of earlier civilizations, and particularly a monarchical, autocratic, despotic earlier civilization, which is how it's characterizing this obviously Near Eastern ruler, right? In the desert, and you think of Egypt, maybe you think of Mesopotamia or somewhere in West Asia or Arabia, but I think people think first of Egypt. That's what it's most assimilable to. I mean, the whole idea of the past as done, finished. You know, the whole poem is, well, maybe there's something else going on. Maybe there's the threat that this despotism and the autocratic power of Ozymandias is still there somewhere. I'm not sure of that, though. I think that the poem, everything in the poem is conspiring to make it seem like he's dead, he's over and done. Look, he when he was alive, he claimed his power, but now it's completely gone. It ends with the decay of this colossus as a wreck, and it's overdetermined. It's not just that this monument is a wreck and decayed, but it's surrounded by a desert, a land that is boundless and bare, stretching far away in every direction, lone and level sands. Nothing is growing, right? Nothing is growing. So the passions yet survive. Something alive has left its stamp. Maybe it's telling us how to read this poem after Shelley is dead, that, something is still to be read. Maybe it's telling us how to read poetry. But it's also telling us that everything that went into the making of this monument and everything that the monument represents is now contained within this wreck that is on lifeless sands. And this is a land, this is in the period when Britain was first gaining an empire or let's say imperial power in Asia, West Asia, in Egypt. This was all in the future, and future decades of the 19th century. There's a sense here that region is boundless and bare. It's boundless, and if you read this in a sort of pre-imperial way or proto-imperial, I don't know, early imperial way, boundless and bare means there for the taking. It means that it's easy to fill up, and whatever has been there is gone. It's dead. It's decayed. It's a wreck. So that's the way I read it. It's a particular view on the past that emphasizes the over and doneness of that past, the containedness maybe of whatever had been alive in that past, the subjectivities and the power relations that obtained then, and its availability now to the present. So again, a very Shelleyan poem, a very high romantic poem and a very post-French Revolution poem that sort of draws a sharp break between the old regime and what is now possible, and has some kind of English imperial undertones.
Yeah, when I suppose read or hear the poem, to me it definitely speaks of the hubris of man. It's very much a memento mori kind of it speaks to the ephemeral nature of political power as well. Those are themes that speak to me, and so when I think about it, there's 10,000 things that obviously can pop up, and for everyone else who reads it, it's very different. So I'm just wondering now, if I were to ask you, are there any sort of modern day Ozymandiases that you can think of? What if I said, what is the modern day Ozymandias?
Rulers who claim to be king of kings. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair. Well, not exactly. I mean, if they're just despots and autocrats, of course, you can look around, and in recent, in the past decade, there's been they've been a growing problem, let's say. The challenge is to the more democratic and more broadly based forms of rule and governance. But I don't know. Is there anybody right now who says, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair"? That challenge calls himself. Nobody calls himself king of kings. I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about contemporary geopolitics to be able to identify these particular discursive elements.
I mean, I think we tend to think a lot of modern politics and people, but the example that someone brought up, which I use all the time because I think it's an amazing example, is a sort of modern day Ozymandias really is like an abandoned casino in Atlantic City, right? I mean, we thought that they were going to be the next best thing, and that's just they were going to be in business forever and sort of monopolize the world, and now they're gone, they're abandoned.
Yeah, the Trump Taj Mahal, whatever the name was. Is it still that's over and done, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are in that vein that are done. Yeah, that's the Taj Mahal is gone. There are a couple other ones that went out of business, but I don't remember where.
Sheldon Adelson died yesterday or the day before, didn't he? But I believe his casinos still live on after him. So maybe not.
Right. So maybe not his casinos, but I mean, I suppose if they ever did, I mean, do I think that his casino chain is going to be standing in 2,000 years? Maybe, probably not. I don't think so. So maybe in 2,000 years, you look at one of his old abandoned casinos or luxury resorts, and you say, that's definitely an Ozymandias there. So maybe the answer is far in the future, so we have to wait for it.
Right. Maybe instead of thinking of actual kings or rulers, that we should be thinking of multi-billionaires and so on. These oligarchs who have gained immense fortunes just in the last decade or even the last 10 months.
Yeah. Well, there's several we can probably think of that come to mind.
They come and go, right? I mean, this is part of this poem is just the truism that this Ecclesiastes claim that all is vanity.
I think there's real truth to that, for sure. But I wanted to thank you once again for joining me today. It was such an enlightening discussion.
Trireme Transit is now departing ancient Odyssey. Next stop is Present Ponderings. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.